This is What to Believe, finding signal in the noise. I'm Neil Beerbaum, a journalist turned master coach, reporting what I found across 4 decades of investigation into the human condition. What I found is a flaw in the human operating system, one that makes it hard for us to face the truth about ourselves, and leaves us believing things about ourselves and the world that are false. You'll find a strange comfort here, the comfort of knowing how little is really true, how little of it really matters, and what to do with the reality that remains. Welcome back to another episode in this series where I'm exposing the flaw in the human operating system, one mechanism at a time, from different angles, using hundreds of examples. And remember, what we're doing here is learning to look at things directly so that you can gain an insight that causes a direct and immediate shift in behavior. You don't have to process your feelings about it. You see something and the behavior changes, and the thinking and feeling can catch up afterwards. That gives you the power to self-manage in a way that doesn't cost you. And where giving up something is not experienced as a loss. The gain is self-mastery. The gain is the freedom that you get out of it. Here in episode 4, we're going to look at how your mind has a mind of its own, how Western thinking doesn't recognize this in the way that Eastern philosophies do, and how that hands us a misguided relationship with ourselves and reality. Thinking happens by itself. You don't have a say over the fact that it happens. And with awareness, you can sometimes choose and insert a thought, but that takes development. And even then, we still get overwhelmed by thinking that's already there, that we wake up into. Why does this matter? Because thinking is the fundamental building block of what it is to be human. Being able to think, being able to form language, that's what makes us human. If we don't understand our relationship to that fundamental building block correctly, then we don't understand our fundamental relationship to life. We spend a lot of time in illusion and delusion, dealing with things that are not real and that don't matter. And that causes a lot of unnecessary stress and creates a lot of unnecessary drama in the world. And it produces a particular illusion, the one that gives this episode its title, the illusion that you created yourself. And let's start with the clearest illustration of this. I don't know if you're like me, but if you've ever lain awake at night, woken up at 2, 3 in the morning, thinking about things, worrying about life and money and all the other stuff that happens, and trying to get back to sleep, well, there's the demonstration. You did not decide before you went to sleep that at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. I'm going to wake up and worry about this thing happening at work or where the next job is going to come from. No, you went to sleep in the full hope and confidence that you'd sleep until your alarm went off. And now you find yourself awake, and these thoughts are happening, and they are disturbing to you, and you're trying to get back to sleep. Who is the person trying to get back to sleep? That's the I. I am trying to get back to sleep. And then we say, my mind is doing this or that. So there we can see it very clearly. My mind is doing it. I did not turn my mind on. I find myself thinking these thoughts. I find thoughts happening despite me, despite my will, despite my intention, despite my efforts. They have a life of their own. My mind has a mind of its own. But to say, I think, in that instance, wouldn't be true. To say I find myself thinking would be more accurate. And that's quite clear and obvious in the middle of the night. It also applies generally throughout the day, although we don't experience it like that. During the day, we feel more awake, more in control, but it's not really any different. And so even during the day, it would still be more accurate to say, I find myself thinking, I find myself needing to be right, I find myself needing to look good, I find myself worrying. I find myself. If any of you have ever spent any time in your life trying to find yourself, there you are. Here's the thread I want you to hold on to through this episode, is that at every level of self that you can locate, you've found yourself with it. What I mean is, and I'll get into this more later, is just the fact that I'm aware of my thinking and the fact that I might be aware that I'm aware, that level of self that is aware, you also find yourself with. You didn't invent that either. I'll explain some more later. In the first 2 episodes, I talked about the need to be right and the need to look good. And those are 2 consequences of us not understanding this relationship correctly. When we get caught up in an argument or in looking good and we think this is me doing it, this is me who has this idea, it's my idea. And we get carried away by the need, and then we think it's us, that we created that point of view, we who created that perspective. And we don't realize the degree to which it imprisons us and drives us into conflict and unnecessary drama. But once you can see that it's not who you really are, that you find yourself with it, you can exit it more directly. You don't have to spend 20 years in therapy scratching around going, why do I do this? You exit it because it's a fundamental ego mechanism. You recognize it's part of the structure. It just happens. And if you understand which step comes first, that thinking arises, that you find yourself carried in a wave, and then you identify with that wave and think it's you who's initiating the thinking, well, there's the basic error that we all make. And so today's episode is going to add a third mechanism to that family. There's the need to be right, we mentioned, the need to look good. And now we're going to look at another one, the need to believe that we are self-created, self-authored. The need to assert that we created ourselves to be the way we are, and the need to assert our preferences within that. And once again, for the binary brains, I'm not saying we can't self-author and self-create, but until we reach a particular point of awareness, we are not doing that. And as far as I can tell, we don't have an exit from this game. We can only recognize it. So here are some examples, which I'll come back to and expand on later in the episode. Let's say you have anxiety, not only when you're asleep and wake up in the middle of the night, but even during the day. You don't decide to be anxious. You find yourself being anxious. You come after the fact, after the already thinking mind. Or let's say you're going on a date and you find yourself with a checklist of requirements. They must have strong hands, blue eyes, and like the same music as you. Those requirements, even your music preferences, did you invent them? Or did you just notice one day that you have them? Or your special sporting or musical talent, did you create that? Or just find yourself with it? Your talent for business, your interest in science, your natural sensitivity, your spiritual interests. Did you walk into a room and choose from among options? Oh, I'll have sensitivity for this lifetime, combined with a special talent for tennis and a preference for blue eyes. No, none of those. You just found yourself with them. And even if you did choose, say you chose between tennis and music, that part of you that did the choosing, also not created by you. You also found yourself being the person who made the choice. Sometimes we catch ourselves doing the thing we know we shouldn't, choosing the thing we know is the wrong move, the wrong option, and yet we feel powerless to stop ourselves. That part of yourself that's aware you're making the mistake in the moment, you didn't choose that part either. You just find yourself with it. There's a picture that holds all of this together. You're a boat on an ocean, but you think you're the ocean. Not only that, but you think that you made the ocean and that you can remake it if only you can figure out how. That's a lot of wasted effort and misguided energy if you know anything about boats and oceans. No wonder you feel powerless and frustrated because you're resisting the very ocean of life. And here's the next big mistake we make. Something in you registers this fact that you come after thinking, but really doesn't like it. But because it's not recognized, it's not dealt with, then that not liking becomes a kind of background hum to your life. It becomes a white noise of dissatisfaction to the very form of life. It's Bruce Springsteen's hungry heart, felt more acutely by some than by others, but it's always there. And what that produces practically is a mood of discontent. And when I say mood, I'm talking like climate versus weather. You can live in a hot, humid climate and have sunny and rainy days. That's the weather. The weather varies. The variable sun and rain is the weather, but the humidity is pervasive and consistent. So your emotions go up and down like the weather daily, but the background hum of discontent is the climate of your life, if you're sitting with this in the way that I've described, which most of us are until we become aware of it. If you're constantly dissatisfied, like there's something missing, you're constantly needing something, wanting something to happen, and you look for it out there by trying to change circumstances to suit you better so you can feel more comfortable, finally be at peace. You want life to conform to your demands, when life is actually set up the other way around. And all of that is something you have no choice over. You came late to the game, late to the party, not a game that you can define. This is the game of life as it is handed to us. And there is no other game in town. That's the part we struggle with, the Western mind struggles with enormously. And when we break through that and we see it, we think we've suddenly spiritually enlightened. That's how powerful it is when we see the other side of this coin, which we'll get to. The next episode, we'll spend all on that. And this is not to say we become vegetables and passive. I'll explain all of this. Let's not be binary brains about it. Stay open. Let's look first at how we've tried to answer this background hum of discontent in our modern Western world. We've tried to answer it with choice, with the theme and the worship, I would say, of choice. And this is not a generational complaint by me. It's not my opinion. It's a clear lens we're looking through, an ontological lens. If you look over the last century, we've become dominated by a commercial advertising mindset that has declared choice the answer to everything. Consumer choice came first. Now it's identity choice, relationship choice, everything choice. We've elevated choice to an almost sacred status. And why? Because it's the ego's retort, the assertion of the ego's will over the fundamental unacknowledged fact of life, that you did not have a choice and you still don't. But the ego says, I don't like that. I'm going to fight back. But even those preferences you fight for, your behavioral preferences, your foibles even, your irritation when someone talks too loudly, your frustration with untidiness, your love for a type of cuisine or style of music, you didn't choose them. But it feels like you have a choice when you fight for them, and when someone challenges you on them, then the need to look good and the need to be right kicks in, and that feels even more like you. So fighting for choice and being right about your choices and your right to defend those choices and fight for those choices along with looking good, these are all automatic mechanistic ego reactions to the way life is. They're all you trying to change the ocean of life by rocking the boat. Give it up. You can't. Life will shape you, whether you like it or not. Ask anyone who's over 60, who's lived the life, and see how much didn't go their way and how much life shaped them despite all their efforts. But no, you think you're going to be the exception. I'm going to fight it out. I will get my way. To some degree, I'm not saying entirely not, but a lot of it is not going to go your way, and a lot of it doesn't matter. So you can let it happen peacefully, realistically, not fighting for those preferences, or you can spend your life fighting it, fighting for the preferences and the ways of being that you were born with, that you found yourself with, simply because you found yourself with them. And you declared that they are you because your ego wanted something to hold on to. And if you do that, life will break you, guaranteed. The tree stands strong for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. But part of its strength is its flexibility. If it's too rigid, it breaks. So we're still on that same thread, moving down layer by layer. At every level of self you can locate, you found yourself with that. I'll come back to the point in a moment. I'll expand those examples and illustrations. For now, it's important to note that this is not just me saying this. Here's the lineage. And this is important, don't skip it. Eastern philosophy differs from Western philosophy on this very point. Buddhism and the religions of the East recognize and accept this as a fundamental fact. And I'm not advocating Buddhism or denying any of the Occidental Western religions or beliefs, just pointing out a fact that Buddhism focuses on the need for awareness through meditation to manage the mind. So the religions and philosophies of the East, the Tao, which is even older than Buddhism, pointed to something similar, that there's a flow that you align with rather than a life that you command. And then there's the Toltec wisdom tradition of South America. Now, in our modern age of knowledge, we reject things that aren't modern, scientific, based on neuroscience. But from an ontological, phenomenological point of view, the Toltec wisdom tradition is the most solid I've encountered. You can read about it in the books by Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements and The Voice of Knowledge, The Mastery of Love. I'll put them in the show notes. And the Toltecs say our thoughts are nothing more than a wakeful dream, a dream that we need to wake up out of. They really, really nail the description of this and the consequences and implications of it and how you can live with an awareness of it. And all of these recognize that the mind creates illusion. In the Indian tradition, they called it Maya. The Toltecs called it the mitote. And the point is to be aware of the exact mechanisms of the mind, the illusory mind, to have a right relationship with reality, or the illusions created by mind in order to have a right relationship with reality. And this is why Eastern thinking has grown in popularity and has found its way into Western culture, especially through the form of coaching in the last few decades. And there is very little of this in Western religion or thought. Christianity doesn't like it, and science doesn't like it, just as most Western people don't like it, or their minds don't like it, because it means we're not in charge, not as in charge as we think we are. We like being in charge. I don't want to get into a theological or scientific debate here, so let me keep it simple and clear, and true to the ontological form that we're working with. And this is very clear if we look at it directly. Neither Christianity nor science is platformed on an observation of the nature of mind. Both take for granted a single position of I, as in the I, when I say I think or I find myself thinking that position of I, or the position of that I within the mind, precedes thought according to Western religion and science. It precedes thought. In Eastern thinking, it comes after thought. They recognize this more accurately than we do. In Western religion, anything that comes from outside is angels, Holy Spirit, or the devil. Or in science, it's chemistry or external stimuli. At no point do either of them look at the mind and say, oh, hang on, there's something we've been missing here. Initially, when the sciences which had been applied to physical matter and laws of motion by Newton, etc., were then applied to human behavior, the behaviorists decided they could only observe what was externally observable, and they could only look at responses to external stimuli. So it was all what could be observed. And Pavlov and Skinner did those experiments, and they treated the human mind as no different from the mind of animals, despite the obvious difference that the human has complex language and can describe and manage its own actions. In other words, the mind could describe and manage the actions of the mind. The early behaviorists did not recognize that. They said, no, there's nothing going on inside that black box. It's just the stimulus, external, give them pellets at different intervals and see how they behave. And then extrapolate that to humans. Any idea about internal processes and thoughts and the actions of the mind internally, they just shut that down. And then Aaron Beck came along, a behaviorist, cognitive behavior therapy, and he said, no, people can see inside themselves. They can distinguish automatic thoughts. And it was only then that the nature of mind was given a sideways glance by Western science. And maybe a few others like William James and Carl Jung might have looked at it as a possibility. Still, in general, Western thinking has produced behaviorism, psychodynamic therapy, psychiatry, neuroscience, all of which focus on the impact of external stimuli on a self that is taken for granted as being undifferentiated from the thinking that surrounds it. Within Western thought, there have been some exceptions, and they're more recent. Martin Heidegger talked about thrownness. In other words, we are thrown to be human, exactly the concept I've described. We find ourselves thrown into this game without a choice. He described that in a very complicated book, Being in Time, which no one really understands. Everybody can only access the secondary interpretation of it. I don't know who the first person was who actually interpreted that book, but it's very complicated to read. So don't be going there unless you want to really twist your brain on this. Keep it simple. Jean-Paul Sartre responded to being in time with being in nothingness. And so those philosophers did cover this to a degree. In a more visible and practical and recent sense, the observation of mind as an independent entity that gives rise to involuntary thinking is taught by the Landmark Forum, which originated from the EST trainings founded by Werner Erhard in California in the 1970s. And the rise of coaching, and ontological coaching in particular, borrows on that lineage and through that forms a bridge between Eastern and Western thinking. And the form of coaching I trained in borrows from that lineage. So let me bring this down to ground with some examples of how this form of egotism, believing that we created ourselves to be the way we are, and expressing it through the assertion of preference, and how this plays out in the real world. So remember, we said in the background, we don't create ourselves to be the way we are. Something in us suspects that that's true, but doesn't like it and looks away. And the ego, which is the part that doesn't like it, responds by saying, damn it, I'll show you. And I'll show you by expressing and asserting my preferences on the world, fighting to be right, getting my way, and defending them to the death. That's the mechanism that we're talking about here. What we're saying is that our assertion of preference is an automatic mechanistic ego reaction to the fact that we did not create our world or create ourselves. So let's look at some practical examples of how this plays out in the broader world that we can observe, and then we'll take it closer to ourselves. Let's take a sportsperson, someone who's highly talented, and then they get interviewed after a game. They'll say, I want to thank God for the opportunity. Or when they score and they make a religious sign. And what they're doing is acknowledging that they did not create themselves to have the talent that they have. Not that God made me score the goal or helped me score the goal. They're recognizing that their talent is God-given. Because when you have talent that is wonderful, at some point you've got to recognize this is a gift. It's literally a gift. There's the word. It was a gift. It was given to me. They find themselves with it. There's an element of humility and, more importantly, of accuracy in that. Yes, you might have found and followed your passion and did the hard work, the training, even the discipline. But you didn't create that part of yourself either. You found yourself maybe being pushed by your parents or by some passionate desire, and you responded. But you didn't create the desire or the parental pressure or your response to it. You might just as easily have been someone who didn't have those pressures or who didn't have the discipline, didn't have the passion, and drifted away from the sport despite the talent. There are many of those. So thinking you created yourself as this talented, disciplined sportsperson would indicate a lack of awareness. It would be egotistical. If we saw a sportsperson who did that, we would think that of them. But most of them fortunately don't. They know that they came after the fact. And we experience that as humility. And what I'm adding to the thing is that it's actually accurate. It's accurate to the way life is. Now let's contrast that with the billionaires of our world. The 7-figure exiters, I call them. The ones who sold businesses for 7 figures and then put that on their LinkedIn profile. 4 times exits as part of their credential. And many of them start YouTube channels and sell online courses. They say, do like me and you too can become rich like me, magnificent like me, genius like me. Unlike our sports people, these exiters do not credit a higher power for their talent or good fortune. They project the belief that they created their success for themselves. They reckon themselves to be these deserving geniuses. If you read a book like Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, he argues convincingly that very often the success in trading and business is simply survivorship bias. Those who managed might be through luck, fortune, some good decisions, and the odds in their favor are the ones who lasted longest and made it out the other side. There are many who are equally talented, equally capable, who simply didn't make it because of odds, probabilities, perseverance, circumstances around them, etc. But our billionaires don't believe that. They put themselves on pedestals. And we reinforce their delusions. We read books about Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett, Elon Musk. We hang on their every word. And yet we don't all get rich like them. Now, if our billionaires were like our sports people, we might experience them being more like those English lords of the manor from a century or two ago, or some Japanese CEOs. Those are 2 examples that come to my mind of leaders who regarded themselves as fortunate inhabitants of a custodial role, we could say. The English lords of the manor, or whatever sins they might have had, it is demonstrated very clearly by Lord Grantham in Downton Abbey. He saw himself as having inherited this custodial role which came with a responsibility to the people that the whole system supported. So he didn't aggrandize himself as having created it, as something special. He recognized that he found himself in that role. He had inherited it through generations, and he had a responsibility to the people. So he was just part of the team, but he happened to be the captain of the team. That's kind of the attitude. You get that very much from stories about Japanese CEOs who don't earn 300 times what the average worker earns and eat at the staff canteen, etc. And you would think that if our billionaires and owners had a little more of an accurate view of the world, that they did not create themselves in the position that they are, then they might behave a little bit more like that, and we might have a slightly different game playing out at the social and economic level. It's easy to point to billionaires. Let's look at where this shows up closer to home in our own lives, in the arguments we have with each other every day. Let's take the liberal mindset. And I'm not choosing sides here. I'm just pointing out an obvious one that happens. So you might insist, a liberal person might insist that a person has no choice over their sexual orientation. Fair point. Not arguing that. But then you'll condemn someone with a conservative viewpoint who disagrees with you, and you'll call them prejudiced, as though they made themselves that way. As though you both walked into a room and each selected liberal or conservative, and since you selected liberal, you've put yourself automatically on the high ground. That's the attitude we come with as liberals. And neither is true. Each person, the liberal and the conservative, had ultimately equally little choice over who they became. And while you may experience yourself as having made a decision, having had some conscientizing moment, that part of you that made the decision, that responded in the way that you did to that moment of awareness, you didn't choose that part either. You found yourself with that. Whether you like it or not, it's not about whether you like it. It's true. You cannot find a point at which you created that part of yourself. You found yourself with it. You found yourself responding in that way. So it's more true and accurate to observe that, and what that gives you is a little bit more humility towards your liberalness and compassion towards the conservative. And if you're conservative and you're looking at people who say, let's take that example of sexual orientation, and I know there's a lot of craziness around the gender theme, but let's just take a simple example, for the sake of example, of sexual orientation, being gay. With a very conservative mindset, you might look at them and say, no, that's sinful, they're choosing it, it's not natural. As though you created yourself too to have that point of view, as though they could have created themselves and chosen that. Nobody created themselves to be the way they are. You all found yourself at whatever position you are. Let's settle it there, okay? So at every level of self that you can locate, you found yourself with it. I'm sorry, there's no other game in town. That's the game. You find yourself with it. The best you can do is become aware. And when you recognize that, it gives you some humility and some compassion for the other side. That's where this is going. You'll see when we get further down the road. It's one of the places where we're going. The second part is that it gives you a more accurate view of life and not pursue unrealistic ideas and waste energy on what's not real and what doesn't matter. And just to wrap that one up, because there's a lot of this going around as well. Let's say you hold a liberal mindset and you imagine yourself transplanted into a rich American family in the Deep South during the age of slavery. Do you tell yourself that you'd have been the one who spoke out, the one who stood against gender and racial discrimination and slavery? If you do, then you really are entertaining the illusion that we create ourselves to be the way we are. Chances are you would have been one of them, whatever you were born into. If you are a black person now and you were born white during apartheid, chances are much greater that you would have been one of them. So you did not create yourself to be the way you are. You find yourself with it, whether you like it or not. And here's another one from the world of dating, the current world of dating. I'm happily married. Yes, there is such a thing. So I'm not dating. And I'm told that people these days are going into dating with a list of demands and conducting a tick box exercise. Based on what we've seen today, that you don't create yourself to be the way you are, what these daters are effectively saying is something like this. They're saying, even though I didn't create these preferences, these foibles, I find myself with them, yet I'm going to fight for them. I'm not going to let you or anyone else influence me away from them. Life shaped me, but I put my stamp on it. I froze myself in time, and now I won't change for you or anyone. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty childish and egotistical. The point to see is that at a structural level, whether the strutting billionaire, the protesting liberal, the tick box data, are all doing the same thing at a structural mechanistic level. They're all convinced, despite the evidence, that they created themselves, that they can take the credit for who they are, and that they are then entitled to act with the egotism that such a mindset inevitably generates. But what's really happening is your mind has a mind of its own, as we've seen. It's already happening, and you're watching a movie that your mind projects, and you think it's real. You think you're the director and the actor. What you haven't noticed is that, in fact, you're the audience. You're watching the movie. At best, you're the actor and the audience. You're watching yourself in the movie. But it's not your movie. You're not producing and you're not directing. And the game we're pointing to, the real game of life, is this. The game is that when you finally figure out that you're also the audience and the actor, then ironically you get a chance of being the director for a scene or two. And then life says, no, I'm taking over. You go back, sit down, be the audience. I'm going to just, life just plays out. It's an ironic twist. And it is. Life is ironic. What's playing out is that when you see the situation as it is, when you put yourself in a more accurate relationship with reality as it is, then you get to do something about it. Then you get to direct your own movie by not being run by those mechanistic ego reactions. In this case, the ego is reacting to the fact that you did not have a say in being born or who you were born to be. The ego feels diminished by that fact, and ego doesn't like being diminished. So it goes on the attack. It says, I will assert my preferences to the death. Preferences or death, to borrow from Eddie Izzard. I will obliterate the feeling of discontent with the satisfaction of choice. Praise to the God of choice. Don't over-intellectualize this. Look at it directly. Ontological first principles. You do not create your thinking. You didn't choose to be born where you were. You don't create yourself. You can be aware of your thinking, and you can see the patterns of your thinking. And that part that does the seeing didn't create itself either. Even if you can be aware of that, and even if you can be aware of being aware, you didn't create that either. All the levels we can find, we didn't create. We find ourselves with them. And this is where I have to be honest. This is the trap that we can find ourselves in, is that some of us, having heard all of this, can start to develop an ego around the fact that I'm the one who sees this. I'm the one who isn't a strutting billionaire or a protesting liberal or a tick box data. I'm the aware one, as though I created the aware one, the one who now sees. I didn't create that either. Same thing. At every level of self you can locate, you find yourself with it. So one can't develop a spiritual ego on top of this material, just like the liberal ego or the billionaire ego we looked at. The spiritual ego is the same thing when it thinks it created itself, when it identifies with a secondary layer. And that may sound fairly limiting, like what's the point of all this then? Well, I went on a search for meaning and purpose in life, and I found this. What I recognize is that life is bigger than me, and my position is to fix my relationship to life not to protest against it. And that's where the peace and the satisfaction and the meaning comes from. And I've had deep lessons around this in my life. I'll share that in future episodes. I have been humbled many times on this path to coming to this place. And so what I can say is that the position of awareness is a better position than not being aware. It's a more responsible position. It's just not yours. You found yourself with it. So you can't take credit for it. At no point are you the creator of yourself. You can have awareness of your thinking. You can have meta-awareness, awareness of your awareness. You can probably go a level further. I haven't reached enlightenment yet, but at no level can I say that I created this. It's devastating news for the modern person's ego, and it's the news most modern people need to hear. The one thing I have seen is that when people gain an awareness of this, they very seldom use it for malicious ends. Maybe you get a few psychopaths in the world who might do that, but that's a very small percentage. 99% of people I've encountered who become aware of this as a phenomenon develop the humility and compassion that is inevitable with it, become more understanding of themselves and others, choose to do better things with it. A lot of the issues that we're experiencing in the world right now is because of the egotism of needing to assert our preferences, whether you're conservative or liberal. And when you recognize this, you recognize that you have no real grounds to develop arrogance or ego around yourself, any part of yourself. And so with that, I'd like to close with a piece that I've written that pulls all of this together. I call it true leadership. And it goes like this. When you say, I decided this or that, you really believe that the I that's speaking is some kind of self-created entity. Like you spoke yourself into being one day and then decided who you would become. Carl Jung said, and I quote, all modern people assume that there is nothing they have not made up. We think we have invented everything physical, that nothing would be done if we did not do it. Well, that is our basic idea, and it is an extraordinary assumption. End quote. If you look more closely at the evidence available to you, you'll see that you did not create yourself in this way. You found yourself, having been born into a family and a country and a time you did not ask for, and every decision you made was a reaction to that. An objective observation reveals that who you are, yourself, emerged and took residence. You found yourself with it, making decisions that seek to further that same sense of self. When you see this clearly, two possibilities open up. First, the possibility that you can create yourself completely anew. You can decide to become someone who has no reference to your past. That does not mean you have to destroy your past or everything about it. There will certainly be many things you want to keep. But it does create some freedom about what you can choose to do and who you can choose to be. You do not have to be everything you have become. Second, you see that having assumed you create yourself, you've tended to treat other people as though they create themselves too. As though they woke up one day and chose to be the way they are, with all their faults and shortcomings. When you see that people did not choose who they become, but rather find themselves being the way they are, that opens up the space for compassion and empathy. Forgiveness happens as a natural consequence. And the possibility of true leadership emerges as you then seek to guide people towards seeing this for themselves and creating new possibilities for their own lives. And that concludes the reading and concludes episode 4. The illusion that you created yourself, your mind has a mind of its own, so does the eye that watches it, and so does the one watching that. At no level do you find a self that you created. What you find at every level is a self that you found yourself with. And that's where this work begins. And in the next episode, we'll look at what is the alternative to that. When we develop a level of surrender, equanimity, and being okay with the way life is and with what happens. It's a peaceful path, and it's not a passive one. I'll explain more. Join me for that episode, episode 5. That's what to believe for this week. If you're finding value from this, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. If something landed, not just makes sense, but actually landed, then share it with someone who you believe could benefit from it as well. That's how this work spreads. You'll find a written companion on Substack under my name. And if you want to take it further, there are ways to work with me. You'll find the link in the show notes. I'm Neil Bierbaum. Thank you for listening. See you next time.